Honestly, I do think the bulk of my job is just to take care of people, right? We got to work on strategy and vision and some of those kind of things. But if you take care of people, the rest will come, right? You don't have to have all the ideas.
Hello, Loren.
How is Kelsey today?
Kelsey is doing wonderful. Excited for another episode of Campus Confidential. How are you?
Yeah, doing great. I'm excited too. I think today's guest is going to be really engaging for our listeners.
So, Loren, why don't you tell us who we have on as today's guest?
We have today Pam Watts, who is the executive director, essentially the CEO position, but the title is executive director for NIRSA. She has been there. I'm trying to remember how long, Kelsey. I know as the executive director about 10 years, right?
I think 12.
12 years?
I think she's been at NIRSA for maybe 15 to 17 years, something like that.
Okay, so been there quite some time. And for folks who don't know, NIRSA is on almost 1,000 campuses throughout North America and serves 3,500, almost 4,000 actually, professional members who work in campus recreation. And I read a stat that it serves, I think it's 10 million students have some form of participation in campus recreation. So really a significant position, and I'm really delighted that we had to spend some time with her.
Yes, Pam is one of my favorite people. And when I was in the role at NACIS, was one of my confidants' inspirations. And I really think the way she shows up in today's podcast is true to who she is, both personally and professionally. We get a little insight to who Pam Watts is from a variety of different angles.
Yeah. You said confidant and inspiration, and I think that's perfect. I was thinking similarly, approachability and profound, let's say profundity. Approachable profundity. How's that for too many words? But she was so approachable and so insightful and so profound with the advice about grief and risk and taking care of people and taking time off. So it's going to be great.
Yeah. So let's take a listen. Here's Pam. Hello, Pam. We are super excited to have you on Campus Confidential. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We're here with Loren as well. So tell us how you describe, I feel like we're in a different situation with you. You're our first association executive on the podcast. So tell us how you describe your job to a rideshare driver.
Yeah, that is really, really tough, right? Because it really depends. People may know, this thing we call university life or even student affairs. I mean, let's just pause and recognize that a lot of the world doesn't even know what student affairs means, right? Mm-hmm. And then you try to describe the association behind that. So with a rideshare driver or, someone casually in my social life here locally in Eugene, I really start simple. I typically say that I work with college and university recreation and well-being professionals. And then if there seems to be any spark, I'll go on to say, NIRSA is an association made up of the professionals working in, non-varsity sport, fitness, outdoor, aquatics, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes I'll have to explain what an association is, right? Which for us is, okay, we're the industry and the organization that sits behind an industry to do, advocacy, education, training, things like that. And if I've really bored them to death with all of that, and I'm just getting the glazed over look, then I can always pull out, we run 4 national championships, right? In flag football, basketball, soccer, and tennis. And so most people at least have an appreciation for sport and can kind of get into that hook around national tournaments. So yeah, it's man, you have to read the room to see what they're going to hook into when they're the association behind the industry that not all understand.
How often do they confuse NIRSA and what you do with the NCAA?
Yeah, often they'll want to put us in that same box, and while there's some similarities, I'll say I don't have the control like the NCAA does, right? It's all influence.
Do they have control anymore?
Yeah, well, I mean, the rideshare driver thinks the NCAA has control, right?
That's fair.
Oh man.
So take us back to, you are in an industry that supports, advocates for, and works with higher education. So take us back to Pam in her kind of college days. How what were you like in college?
Yeah.
Where did this start?
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I think I was adventurous, and I think I was a little bit arrogant. I think I did all the exploring, all the testing of boundaries, all those good, learning and development things that you're supposed to do, which I try not to remember too much. Involved some risk taking and some bad ideas and some bad decisions. But you got to cross the line to figure out where the line is sometimes. So I definitely had my dose of that in college. I also went to college with people who were really different than me, especially socioeconomically, right? So I ended up going to Regis, it's a university now, as a college at the time, small Jesuit school. I was coming from the Northwest, a lot of kids from the East Coast, a lot of kids from families with a lot more money than my family had. And so watching that dynamic, watching those expectations was just really, really different for me. A lot of it was hard, right? I had to work during school, they didn't, things like that. But I will say I think I got my payback, if you will, when we all sat down to write our resumes to go get our first job, out of college. And I actually had things to write down. And a lot of my peers in school did not, right? It was like, well, was lifeguarding at the club? Did that count? So that felt good in that moment. But yeah, looking at college today, through the lens we all look at, through these careers, that's what's supposed to happen, right? You're supposed to learn and develop and grow and do all those out of the classroom things. So overall, it was really, really positive.
Give us, I'm interested. What's one adventure? What's one of the lines you crossed to learn where the boundary was?
Boy, Kelsey's really digging here.
What surprises me is, I think this was my sophomore year. I had a friend from New Orleans, and he said, let's go to Mardi Gras. So me and him and another guy decide we're going to go to Mardi Gras. So they pick me up after work on Friday. We drive 24 hours from Denver to, New Orleans, straight through, right? We're just trading off, whatever. We get there. We do Mardi Gras for 3 days straight, right? Very little sleep. The funny thing is, I think I had $40 in my pocket the whole time, right? Like you just, I don't know, people are being generous, you're buying dollar drinks. It just kind of worked, right? And then we turned around and drove home 24 hours after, very little sleep and whatever else. So yeah, that was crazy. That could have gone really differently.
Yeah.
So.
That's a memory. Mardi Gras really brings it home.
Yeah.
Did you stay in a hotel? Were we camping? No. Were we in a car?
No, with one of the guys I went with, we stayed at his dad's house. So that was great, right on City Park, right? And then his sister happened to be working for MTV. So we even had a parking pass from her to park right in the French Quarter. I mean, it was crazy.
You only had $40, but you had all the right connections.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Free place to
Houses
stay.
Houses and MTV.
People open their homes, right? Like I would turn around and be like, oh, how do you know these people? He's like, I don't know these people. We're just at their house on a parade route. Okay. That's just how they roll. Yeah, it's good.
So, Pam, you mentioned when you went to Regis, there were lots of folks with different kinds of money, different wealth, et cetera. Yeah. I'm wondering, as you think about campus recreation and participation, has that stuck with you at all? And how do campuses think about the disparities that exist and trying to encourage participation?
Yeah. You really have to think about folks not as this homogenous class, right? There's not one type of student coming from one type of background. And so, like a great example, I remember years ago, one of our schools was really trying to work hard at getting more participation. And when they finally were able to talk with some folks who didn't participate in campus rec and said, what's your barrier? Why don't you come in the door? Literally, it was women who didn't have enough money to buy a sports bra. Right. And that was preventing them from coming in and, playing on a team or doing a fitness class or, what have you. So it's really, customizing, really talking to your students, really listening authentically with what they have to say and what they have to tell you and trying to meet those needs. And I know sometimes that sounds overwhelming, right? Customization sounds overwhelming, but often it's such a small thing that you can get it done. Right?
Yeah. Going way back, Kelsey started with what were you like in college? Let me just fast forward another minute and say, okay, you didn't go to college to study association management or even higher ed, right? Tell us about what you went to college to do, how you started your career, and what shifts you made to end up where you are now.
Yeah. So I went to school to get an accounting degree. I think I decided in about second grade that I wanted to be a business person, whatever that was. And then I sort of through time figured out what that was. So I got an accounting degree. I graduated. I was a CPA for a number of years, did the public accounting thing, worked in private industry. And I was first hired at NIRSA as a controller, right? I'm just looking for an accounting job in this association that happened to be in Corvallis. And I happened to have just moved to Eugene, was looking for a controller. So I got hired, it quickly became the number two. I worked there for about 3 years, and my career in those early days was very scripted, and accounting careers can be very scripted. There's a clear path. There's maybe, 2 or 3 choices you make versus, thinking about public versus private accounting. But it's very scripted. And my plan was always to have this big bang up career for about 10 years and then have kids and raise them and stay home with them and probably not be in the workforce, maybe re-enter the workforce when I was done raising them 15, 20 years later. Maybe that would be the point when I would get an MBA thinking I needed something to re-enter the workforce with. Like, this was my big plan. So I mostly worked that plan, right? So I worked at NIRSA about 3 years until I was pregnant with my first kid and quit, had no intention of going back into the workforce. And then when my kids were about 3 and 5, I had an opportunity to come back to NIRSA, and my husband was ready to leave his job. And so we made the decision to swap. I said, if you're willing to, stay on with the kids, because this was a goal of mine, I'll try being the one in the workforce, the paid workforce at least, for a couple of years, and we'll see how this works. And it ended up working. So we've been doing that now for however many years. So that was really unexpected, right? I had this plan. I had this clear plan. I was going to work the plan, right? But I also think a lot of careers are like that. You script it in the beginning, and then you just need to stay open to possibilities. And I think when I finally figured out, probably in my early to mid 30s, don't worry about not having a plan, right? Just be open to the possibilities. Because who knew there was this thing called NIRSA? Who knew there was this thing called campus rec? I mean, back to Regis, 1,200 students, 0 campus rec, no intramurals, no club. I mean, I didn't even have a frame of reference for this from my own college experience. So yeah, so that's a bit about my career journey and some of the pivots that it's taken.
How was that shift going from your plan?
Yeah.
I mean, I love a good plan.
I know you do.
So, right, we have a plan, and like you said, you're working the plan, and all of a sudden that plan shifts, and it not only shifts for you professionally, it shifts for you personally, it shifts for your family. There's lots of individuals involved. So I can't imagine that it was like easy peasy.
No, it wasn't. And you have to, I think we've all learned a lot more about grief, coming through the pandemic, and that grief isn't just about when someone dies. We grieve lots of things. And I do think, even though like it was the right decision for my family, it was the right decision, when you bring all the factors together, right? But for me individually, no, that was hard. That was hard to walk away from this thing I had been planning to do, looking forward to do, being the primary caregiver for my children. And yeah, there was grief, right? I had to process all of that. But, it also made me, if I was going to spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day, away from my family, it had to be for the right job. Right. And so I always feel really good about the work I do in NIRSA, that I support an industry that has such an impact on health and well-being, that is, trying to grow good leaders. I feel like that's a worthwhile contribution.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm going to jump around a little here, because I feel like you're someone that I've admired as I came into the association space as a leader, that you consciously have taken space for yourself as needed, to really be fully present in both your personal and professional lives. So was that something that came naturally to you? Is that how did that come about for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, Kelsey and I share a commitment to time off, right?
Oh, we are committed.
Yeah. And when I came back to NIRSA, I think I got like 4 weeks of vacation, and now I get 6, and I take it. I take 2 weeks every summer. I take 2 weeks at Christmas. I try to take most spring breaks when our conference doesn't get in the way. Some of that for me, I have the grounding factor of children, right? And that'll just pull you in, right? In a good way. So I also know that I am someone who, I'm either all in or all out. Right. So I would rather work 12 hours Monday through Friday to have all the weekend off rather than work like 8-hour days and a few hours Saturday morning, a few hours Sunday morning. I need to be all in or all out. And so, time off is important. And when higher ed and through NIRSA started talking more about health and well-being, I was really excited about that. It's some of the reasons I didn't stay in the CPA industry, right? I originally thought, I want to be a partner in a CPA firm. Well, then when I was working in a CPA firm, watching those partners, not only do their accounting work, but then run a business, it's like, they have no lives, right? Ever, not just outside of busy season. So I turned that down. But you got to make space for it. Kelsey, I think you remember the NIRSA board was generous enough to give me a 3-month sabbatical when I was about, 2019. So I was about 7 years in being ED, and I think 12 or 15 with NIRSA. And I went off the grid. I mean, that was weird. I deleted my email off my phone, right? That was a weird little moment, but it was good. And thank goodness that happened in 2019, because then 2020 and running
what happened after that?
This little thing where you had to do unthinkable things like, cancel your conference in an email vote, right?
No big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal.
Well, let's talk about that a minute. So, 2020, tough time for leaders of anything, any organization at any level. What were the kinds of things that frightened you about that period? What were the kinds of things you did to make sure you could persevere because you had people looking to you, not only on campuses, but in the association, membership? What can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you pull your peers and your teammates and your confidence and your supporters closer, right? I think in the association world, all the EDs, the larger groups and the smaller groups, we started meeting a lot more. Right. I started a weekly call in there with, John, who runs ACUI, the Association of College Unions, and Mary, who runs ACUOI, the Association of College and University Housing. And we run really similar organizations, and we have a weekly standing call, right? Because we just got to talk about stuff and support one another. Same thing happened with my senior leadership team on staff, right? We started meeting 2 and 3 times a week just to make decisions and get through stuff and track the temperature of members and track the temperature of staff. So that first year, I feel like the first year was okay of 2020 of COVID, right? I pulled those teams in close. And then, associations can be a lot of bureaucracy, especially higher ed associations, because higher ed's a lot of bureaucracy. And so honestly, the freedom to just make some decisions quickly when the decisions need to be made was almost freeing in a way. So that was good. I don't think the burnout of it all, the slog of it all really hit me until like late 2021.
Yeah. Then what happens? Then what do you do?
Back to bureaucracy.
So, well, and back to well-being. I think it was by summer of 21 that I was doing all the right things and it wasn't helping. Like I could feel myself being burned out, but I was like, I'm sleeping 8 hours a night. I'm exercising regularly. I just got back from vacation at one of the places I love to go. and I still don't feel good, right? And luckily a colleague said to me, you know what, you need to get back into coaching, right? You need to get back into coaching. And I did. I reconnected with an executive coach I'd used before and worked with her for about 4 months to get through it. So, that's another thing. I think coaching is getting more and more accepted in leadership circles. And thank goodness, because we all need it.
That's right. I owe a lot to Jenny. Call out to Jenny any chance I get, right, over the years. I don't know how I would have gotten through some things without her. And what I want to call out, though, your whole what used to work wasn't working. I resonate with that so much. It was like, wait, I'm doing all the things. And then I just had a moment where it's like, well, I just have to do all the opposite things.
It's opposite day.
It was opposite day. It's like, stop pushing so hard, sit and just be, or let the body, like your body actually relax, because it's been holding so much. And I think some of the conversations was just with peers to say, hey, what are you doing about this? And how do we move forward?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, the fear factor that's in all these tough situations, for me, once I can figure out that like I'm not alone, right? Calling up a peer and be like, oh, that's right. Every association is going through this. Every, CEO, ED is going through this. There's just something reassuring about that to me that lets me then kind of relax and be like, okay, we got this. We'll work through this. Maybe it's slower than I like, to your point, Kelsey, or maybe we have to do something different, but we will get through it.
So how do you show up for members in that instance? Because this is happening at the association level, you're feeling it, and then you're called to support, advocate, be there for members. What does that shift look like, or how do you show up for membership in that way?
Yeah, we had to, pretty quickly, we realized that any committee meeting, any board meeting, any, small convening of members, we were going to give up the first anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes to just let them talk about what's going on their campus, talk about what's hard, talk about what's going well, talk about their frustrations, right? They were just going to talk. And if that meant that your agenda for your committee or your board or whatever was going to get delayed, then it just got delayed. Because they just, that was the best thing about associations in this moment, is it gave people, this easy network to access. And what we saw is a lot of that, of course, was relationships built before the pandemic, but the frequency, the depth, all of that accelerated.
What did the pandemic teach you about leadership, Pam? Maybe your own and maybe what you observe in higher education as patterns of leadership. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think these things that we thought were impossible are actually not impossible, right? We did all kinds of things that supposedly never could be done in associations, never could be done in higher ed, right? I mean, higher ed wasn't really embracing online learning, or hybrid learning, right? For the masses. The interaction between, faculty and student, or admin and student. I think there was some resistance around the mental health issues and treating the whole person in terms of the students. I think student affairs is trained and wired to do that, right? But really thinking about the whole campus community stepping up for that. And then frankly, this whole conversation about, whether it's quiet quitting or there's mass exodus from higher ed, and how employees, honestly, that it's going to be tough to go through it, but it's not a bad conversation. Just the example that you all know of, the graduate assistantship that you're supposed to work 20 hours a week, but really you work 40, and that's just well accepted and understood. And, having to have a graduate degree. I mean, I have a bachelor's in accounting, right? So the idea that you have to have a master's degree to get out and make $40,000 a year, come on, so the right sizing of all of that, I think, has been a good outcome of COVID, and we're still in it. And it's hard, because basically what we've said is to students and campus communities, you can have all of this stuff, all of these services, all of this support, all of this academic opportunity for this price. But they've been doing that on the backs of their employees to some extent. And so if you're going to right size that piece for employees, then you have to have a pretty honest conversation about what you actually can and can't offer, for a certain price.
You talked earlier about how your body, and Kelsey was acknowledging this too, how your body says, boy, something's got to change, right? And the first year of COVID, maybe exhaustion wasn't all that profound, but it certainly came thereafter. Do you think in higher education, there is a culture of overwork? Do you think that's mythology? Do you think that's changing? What do you observe?
I do think that the national narrative, I'll call it, is a little stronger than reality, because we all hear it in a national narrative, right? But when I talk to individual members, I don't know, roughly half the time they'll say, yeah, I'm really lucky. I've got a great boss. They've always given me this flexibility. I'm not experiencing those things. I love my campus. But I know 3 other people out there who, don't have that experience, right? So I, just anecdotally or kind of out of my gut, I do think the national narrative is a little too strong, but it's still happening. That came from somewhere.
Yeah. So let's think about the people of NIRSA, the staff that you work with. How have you kind of taken all of this that you're talking about and created a culture that is NIRSA? My understanding is the people that have worked for NIRSA have been there for quite some time, right? Turnover is low. I think people seem to really enjoy working for the association. So what have you done to intentionally create culture? What's your leadership style? What's the vibe?
Yeah. Honestly, I do think the bulk of my job is just to take care of people. Right. We got to work on strategy and vision and some of those kind of things. But if you take care of people, the rest will come. Right. You don't have to have all the ideas. One of the things when I got hired as executive director that they asked me to do was to change the culture from a top down, or really that wagon wheel where there was tight control at the center, to something more collaborative, more team-based, more open, and which is what I wanted to do anyway, right? So it was a good match. So, we spend a lot of time on team building, on relationships, on taking care of people. And getting back to, even customization, we were talking about earlier, sometimes it's little things. So recently, we were taking a look at the bereavement policy, and I don't have pets. I'm not an animal person, but lots of people on my staff are, and pets are very real things in people's lives. So we just changed the bereavement policy to include days off if your pet dies, right? Because if you're an animal person, that's a really traumatic thing. Right. So sometimes it's little things like that. Sometimes it's the larger culture, I think, of just spending time on relationships, giving people that time and autonomy, investing in them. And I have to say, I've always been lucky to have really good board support to do this. And they often, I think they appreciate and maybe sometimes are a little jealous of like the freedom I have to do these kinds of HR things, because they don't often have that freedom in higher ed, especially at state institutions. So they've been really supportive of that as well.
How many employees are there in NIRSA, and then how many volunteers in a given year?
Yeah. So right now we have 29 employees, and in a given year, we engage anywhere from 1,800 to 2,000 volunteers. Right. So that ratio is a little insane.
Yeah. Yeah. And so from a leadership perspective, can you talk about the differences when you're really not supervising volunteers? Although, let's be real. Some volunteers deliver on things and some don't. And so you can't let the ball drop. So how do you toggle between those? What differences in style do you find yourself needing to use with employees versus volunteers, or is there any?
Yeah. So what we talk a lot about internally is that one of the crucial skills you have to have at any level in NIRSA as an employee is the ability to lead with influence, right? Because they're volunteers, right? All you've got is influence. So you've got to make it compelling, or you have to make it fun, or you have to make it something that they're going to get something out of that they find value in, right? So maybe that's expanding their network or learning a new skill, or, lots of different things. But you have to be able to lead with influence. And so, internally as a culture, we really use that too. And sure, in our back pocket, do we have the supervisor employer card if we need to play it? Sure. But we really try to minimize that because we do work with all these volunteers. My friend Mary is fond of saying, like, look, with this volunteer base, if NIRSA is a $4 million company, with all these volunteers, we get to pay like an $8 million company, right? Because you have access to this whole workforce that you're not paying, at least with money. You're paying in other ways. So that leading with influence is the most critical skill, I think.
Is that something that you developed? How did you learn how to help people lead with influence?
I think when you find yourself in situations without a lot of power, you figure out how to lead with influence, right?
Or you get crushed.
Right. I mean, back to the kid world, right? If you ever have a resume come across your desk and that person has led the PTA, hire them.
Absolutely.
Hire them.
And pay them a lot of money.
Yes. I mean, talk about leading with influence and highly political and, all the things, right? Yeah. So I think, maybe the earlier days of being in positions where I didn't have, the power, the stick, if you will, you learn some of this. Yeah.
What's an early leadership lesson that maybe you had to keep learning over and over again before you actually listened?
Yeah. Every promotion I've gotten, I haven't thought I've been ready for. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like, oh, someday I want to be a CFO, but that's in 10 years. Oh, maybe someday I'll be an executive director, but that's like at least 8 years away. And then it happens. Right. So I think the whole believing in yourself, believing in myself, I had to learn over and over and over again. And now, when was this? Maybe 10 years ago, we went on a trip to Hawaii and the whole family's taking surf lessons, right? So Kelsey, I think you took surf lessons a million years ago. You're out there in the water with your instructor and they're pushing you into waves and you're trying to get up on this surfboard. And I had tried 2 or 3 times and I couldn't get up, right? So I paddle back out there and the surf instructor looks at me and he says, look, the only difference between you getting up on this board or not is believing that you can. And I was like, holy cow, he's right. I just have to believe that I can get up on the surfboard. And, of course you do. Same thing with, scary stuff like public speaking. I mean, it's just sheer will to be I can choose to be nervous or I can choose to think that I can go up on that stage and kick ass. Right?
Yeah.
Just a choice. And the nerves still bubble up a little, but it's just a choice.
Yeah. And repetition helps, whether it's surfboarding or public speaking. Just keep doing it. And pretty soon it gets easier, right?
Yeah.
And in associations, gosh, I find the members so forgiving too. I watch the different presidents get up on stage, and, some of them are great because they've had a lot of practice at it and some of them aren't, or they're trying a new thing. And as an audience, the members are just so accepting, right? Even if they don't nail it out of the park.
Yeah, I had the opportunity. I was at a regional conference recently and the president was so nervous and I've known her for years. And I just walked up and I said, here's the thing. Everyone in this audience is cheering for you.
Yeah.
There is not one person that isn't. They all are here for you and want to hear from you. And I think that's just such an amazing part of associations. When people are in it, they're in it for everyone.
Yeah. They really, really are.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Associations may be different than campuses in that way, because I'm not sure that's exactly true on a campus, Kelsey.
Definitely not true on a campus.
But, certainly from an association standpoint, that was my experience too, is that, people were just gracious and grateful and accepting. So that's a wonderful offer, gift to members. Thinking back to pandemic era, in March of 2020, Pam, I saw an article. Actually, I think it might have run in one of the NIRSA publications first, but it was an athletic business magazine. And you and several other women leaders in NIRSA were talking about leadership. And I think I recall you making some observations about leadership, maybe female and male, or at least gendered ways of leading. I wonder if you'd be willing to share with people who hadn't read that article, just your observations about different ways of leading.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had an interesting learning around some of this because, my husband and I, with swapping these, typical roles, it really gives you insight into things that people ascribe to women, maybe. And it's like, no, that's not women. That's just the stay-at-home parent. Right. Or, I used to say a lot that a lot of jobs in corporate America are built for men. That's still somewhat true, but I think the truer thing to say is a lot of jobs in corporate America are built for single income families, right? That to put into a job, what it takes for families with children, right? So it's been interesting to have that opportunity to have those observations about what is truly gendered and what we just assume is gender because we've, served in these traditional roles. But yeah, I'm the third executive director for NIRSA. I'm the first female executive director. I didn't really think about that until a couple leaders called me and said, I never thought I'd see the day, right? It's like, oh, okay, this is a thing. I think, maybe going back to our conversation about leading with influence, women typically haven't had power, right? In a lot of settings, or have had to put up with, sexism and sexist jokes and, little jabs here and there. And so I do think it forces you to have skills that maybe men or folks from other dominant cultures just never had to develop. Right. And then I think that comes out in leadership. So leading with influence is definitely one of them. Women learn an incredible amount through volunteer roles because we do tend to be, the volunteers over men. And I will say another thing that had to be pointed out to me, but NIRSA is in the middle of a string of 4 female presidents. And someone called me up and said, you must feel really good about that. The whole see yourself in leadership, the opportunity. And, I was first like, I didn't do that. That just happened. Right. And they were like, no, you being in this seat helped. Right. So, and NIRSA had, in NIRSA's history, women were kicked out at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think it was the late 50s or early 60s. They were literally voted out of the membership. And then had to be voted back in 1971. So, yeah, we have this interesting history.
And NIRSA was founded on HBCU campuses as well,
yeah,
right?
Right.
So,
So,
really fascinating, complex history.
Yeah, the first meeting was, 20 intramural directors from 11 HBCUs, and they continued to meet for a couple of years and then decided to invite, PWIs. That's not what they were called back then. And then, we have in the building, we have the picture of all the presidents. And sure, the first 3-4 years, it's, Black men as presidents, and then it's white men until the
forever.
80s.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
forever, right? Yeah. And then it's just, 1 or 2 here and there. And then in the last 10 years, we've done a lot better diversifying, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of race and ethnicity, which has been great to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I feel like anecdotally, a lot of higher ed associations started at HBCUs for that community purpose driven, and then we're kind of taken over.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And to watch that shift coming back is quite.
It's a tough, and that doesn't mean we love to tell the story of being founded by HBCUs. That in no way, shape, or form means we were perfect at this work.
That's right. That's right.
I do think it does. It's a higher calling to the work around diversity and inclusion, to honor that founding. But we should all be doing diversity and inclusion work anyway. So.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that gender dynamic, we don't have kids, but Brian and I have served in those kind of opposite gender roles. And what's been fascinating from an observation perspective is he's now in a role where he is on campus and I am working from home. And so there's some renegotiation of who's doing what.
Yes.
And
yes.
I've struggled with that a little bit of I haven't done laundry in 27 years and by golly. I'm not doing it still.
I think our next big negotiation is going to be when we retire, right? Because okay, so do I retire from NIRSA and then have to pick up half the household duties? And does that feel like retirement? But then my husband's like, but when do I get to retire? Right, from this list of...
That's right. That's
So,
right.
like,
It's a fascinating space.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm not sure I figured it out, but it's a renegotiation of family duties.
Well, you get the podcast you can do then will be Household Confidential.
Yeah,
The secrets to the Harmon Finn household.
And we will do that
Renegotiating.
with glasses of wine.
yes,
Or maybe gin. I'm not sure what level.
Yeah. But, I do feel like there's been made a lot of progress, right? Like the fact that we're even having this conversation, Kelsey, right? No, I do think in relationships with or without kids that there is a lot more balance. I think I saw an article a couple of weeks ago about, maybe women in marriages with kids have given up some of the actual tasks. And even then they were talking about the cognitive load of like, well, maybe you could get your husband to do the things, but you still had to tell him all the things to do. Right. And we seem to be moving past some of that, but now it's the, who is doing the work to learn about the things your kids need, right? So you're going through terrible twos, who's reading the articles and figuring out what the tactics should be, or you have a kid who is struggling in school or so, right? There's still like that piece of work, but it's success that we're to that level, talking about that level, because that means so many other aspects of this have been taken care of beforehand.
That's right. And I would add to I take responsibility of my need to be in control. Right. This constant reminder of what am I taking on without anyone asking me to. It's just and am I doing it from a place of control or a place of care and concern? And so I think we live in this amazing time as humans that we can actually consider this part in our relationships. And we do this, I think, for society, but professionally, personally, in all sorts of areas.
Well, I want to harken back to something, Pam, you said earlier about the I can't remember the context, it had to do with role, but grief, this notion of sort of letting go of something. And I guess this has been true for me too, as I've had to, every new beginning starts with an ending of some kind. And so, retiring and it's letting go of role and visibility and things, renegotiating roles, letting go of the control. I mean, I suppose that a full acknowledgement of these transitions would be full feeling of what you're letting go of too.
That's right.
Yeah. And, back even to our conversation about leadership or culture at NIRSA, I do think that leaders need a better understanding of grief and grieving processes, right? Even trauma coming out of COVID, because we, I say this all the time, we ask people to bring their whole selves to work and put their whole selves into this job or this role that we want them to do. So we have to take care of the whole person. And sometimes, sometimes someone's grieving something, whether it's a death or, like you're saying, Loren, just a transition. There was, there's all the external traumas in the world that your employees are processing, and you got to figure out how to step up for them. But there's also, early in the pandemic, we went through layoffs. And, that creates trauma. Mm-hmm. And I had a really smart HR person at the time who said, we have to do this. We'll do it as kindly and compassionately as we can. We'll go through a process, and I feel like we did. But she said, this will create a scar on the employees who are still here, and you will watch it rear its ugly head for years to come at little moments.
That's
right?
insightful.
And it was prophetic, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book, perhaps you're familiar with it, by a guy named William Bridges, and the book's name is Transitions, and it's been around a long time. And it describes the organizational change process in this. When you map it to now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has been challenged a little bit. The grief cycle, it's been challenged, but it looks a lot like that grief cycle. And what I took from that book is, I've got to go this transition. I've got to go through a little bit and lead people through a little bit of mourning for what they thought it was going to be like and what they had hoped for themselves and what they believed the organization was about, and now we're changing. So I think your grief comment is prophetic. It's really important in sort of everyday life things, not just the rituals of pain in life.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, Kelsey, just our willingness to acknowledge that sometimes you just got to sit in it, and you won't be there forever. But, like if you avoid the pain, if you think you're going to go around the pain or under the pain or over the pain,
skip the pain part.
It'll come back and smack you upside the head at some point, right? So just go through it. Gather up your friends or your support system and just go through it. And I think that's true in the workplace too.
Yes, I think I might have. That was my pep talk to myself this morning, even of like. Just such a reminder that nothing is forever. And whatever's happening in this moment is this moment, good, bad, or indifferent. And let it be.
You're gathering up your friends to help you get through it makes me think a little bit about what is so current right now in campus, belonging and well-being. And let me say too, by the way, I have admired you and NIRSA for a long time because, frankly, before it was trendy, that's where NIRSA was at. Evidence-based work, belonging work about participation and engagement and inclusion, and then well-being, not just physical muscles, but the sort of whole body sense of well-being. And so you've been at that a long time. And now it's kind of, it's kind of popular on campus, and you all have been there for a while. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how other leaders in NIRSA are impacting that conversation on our campuses.
Yeah, some of it's the evidence that shows that, if you have a good sense of belonging, if you're paying attention to these different aspects of well-being. I mean, if you just need to make the ROI case around, recruitment, retention, graduation rates, GPA, right? This stuff works, right? It's sometimes it just is that simple. I think the work right now is, how do you create that sense of belonging, that sense of community, meeting the needs of an increasingly diverse student body, right? It is not this largely middle class, privileged student body anymore that are all 18 years old when they arrive on your campus. And so really thinking through that. And there are some, I think some schools doing a great job, right? And you hear about it more, you hear about schools meeting the needs of under-resourced students and even faculty staff on that. So I think that's part of it. I think, recreation has been at this a long time. And even though we have our roots in sport, it's baked into the DNA to be inclusive, right? So elite sport is inherently exclusive, right? You cut people from the team. You're trying to be number one. You're trying to be the champion. Where recreation, some aspects may have a competitive element to it, but mostly it's sport for all. Right? It's come in, we'll find you a team, right? Oh, we don't have a sport you like, we'll find you a sport we like. Oh, you don't like team sports? Here's these individual options. So it's just, and I think the field actually, when you're doing something and you're good at it, you don't realize that everyone else isn't doing this too, or doesn't think this way too. So part of our work several years ago was frankly to point out to rec professionals themselves, look at what you're doing for a sense of belonging. Look at what you're doing for social connectedness. You own more than the pie on the chart, around physical health, like you said earlier. So some of our work has been internal with the field for them to understand their impact. And then of course, externally, to understand that impact. And I hope as we graduate students who have had this more holistic experience on a college campus, then they go on to either demand it of their employers or, be those leaders and bosses who can make those things happen. And I'm also really glad we've moved past the, we should do this to save insurance costs, right? Because, 10, 15 years ago, that was how we were going to calculate ROI on all of this. And I think we've moved past that.
Well, and your earlier point about individualization is so important, because what we know about belonging is it looks different depending on your identity. It's different for
exactly.
first gen students, for students of color. You just go right down the list. So the individualization is really how that belonging happens. So your earlier point came to mind.
I had the good fortune to meet Beverly Tatum. I can't remember, Kelsey, if you were part of CHEMA then, but she came to a CHEMA meeting and I was the chair that year. So I got to interview her, and, she's written several books, but, one of her pieces of research and then philosophy that really resonated with me was, it's not an or, it's an and. You need your tribe, right? Folks who you identify with, whatever identities that is for you. And you need to get out and be around people who are different than you. But I often found the conversation in higher ed to be more of an either or, right? Oh, students are here, let's push them outside of their comfort zone, right? Or no, they need all these identity groups. And I loved her philosophy that no, you need both, right? You need your tribe. And it's that strength from the tribe that allows you to go out and engage with people who are different than you and learn something, even though it might be uncomfortable.
That's right. Both and.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
So all of this combined, I'm interested in what and I think you have children that are college age or close to, right? So what is your hope for the future for higher education?
Yeah. I have a freshman and sophomore in college right now. So it is interesting now being on the parent side of the track, having worked from the association perspective. I think when I got that first bill and I was like, what are all these damn fees? Right.
Yeah.
What is this rec service?
I had the same feeling. I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
And she was going where I worked, So.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. No, my hope for higher ed is that, it can still effectively serve that larger civic purpose, right? Its role in society. And it has the potential, and often is in history, to be the game changer, for society, at least in the US, right? I think sometimes we get in our own way and pull back on that. And certainly I think there's some signs of that right now. But often, higher ed is the incubator of new ideas. They can make investments in things because their calculus and ROI is so much longer than, let's say, a corporation, right? Who's looking at research and development. I think that this gift of engaging people in this learning environment as adults, right, or mostly adults, is not something to be taken lightly, and its impact can be profound, absolutely profound. But we're going to have to widen who has access to higher ed and that learning experience. I'm a big fan of liberal arts education. That's coming through this, loud and clear, and especially as we look at where the workforce, where society is with the role of technology and all that, it's more important than ever that it's not necessarily a hard skill. You're teaching people how to think, how to learn, how to grow throughout life. It's an incredible opportunity we have. We have to do good with it.
Well, speaking of profound, what you do, Pam, and what your leadership of NIRSA do for not just students, to be honest with you, for all of us adjacent to and in higher education. I mean, I am a consumer of what NIRSA puts out, and it has helped me and my well-being. So we're really grateful to you and to all the leadership of NIRSA and what you're doing for all of us, really, and grateful. I know Kelsey and I are grateful today that you've spent some time with us. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you on behalf of the members. I'm glad that their work is appreciated in your circles. And it's been great to chat with both of you today. I appreciate the invitation to be on your podcast.
Hey, Loren, are you ready for some extra credit?
I think so. I'm always a little tentative, but sure.
Well, Pam talked a lot about being adventurous. And so it got me thinking, what kind of adventures did you go on in college? Any road trips, anything that sticks out for you?
I feel like you have one in mind already, and I feel the pressure of trying to come up with one that I can share.
Well, I started to think, did I do any road trips? But I will say so I started dating my now husband in college, and we went to Illinois State University, so smack dab in the middle of Illinois. And 30 miles away or so was a town called Peoria, Illinois. And there was a casino, a boat casino. And we thought we were like the coolest when we would jump in his Cougar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And take our trip over to Peoria and spend the afternoon and evening at the casino. So,
did you win?
I mean, in my mind, I was always winning.
Yes. You're a winner, Kelsey. I want you to know that about yourself.
Such a winner.
I don't know that I have any great stories. One story that sticks out in my mind is I went to college outside of Chicago. 2 friends of mine and I jumped in the car last minute, drove all the way to Detroit to go to Cobo Arena and see Deep Purple. Do you know who Deep Purple is, by the way?
I don't. I feel like I should. What kind of music?
It's pretty heavy metalish. It's sort of
definitely not mine.
Our friend Mike Moss would know Deep Purple, I think.
Oh yeah, he probably has the T-shirt.
Yeah. Drove all the way to Detroit for the concert. Saw the concert. Got back in the car, drove home. Who does that? Who drives 4.5 hours for a last minute? I don't do it anymore. I got to be in bed by 9:30.
But Deep Purple was calling.
Yeah. Deep Purple. That's my story. That's the one that came to mind anyways.
I love it. Well, I hope our listeners can pause for a minute and think about some of their best adventures. Until next time.
Campus Confidential is presented by Compass Group, produced by Corey Inscoe and Jen Fisher, with your hosts, Kelsey Harmon Finn and Loren Rullman.